The following is a recording of DSA Wins, Tales from the Campaign Trail, a live discussion and celebration that took place on Thursday, December 16, 2021. This event was hosted by the Tacoma, Los Angeles, Seattle, and Portland DSA chapters. The panelists were Minneapolis City Councilmember-elect Wonsley Worlobah, Somerville, Massachusetts City Council candidate Eve Seitchik, and St. Petersburg, Florida City Councilmember-elect Richie Floyd. This event was facilitated by Leigh Shelton from Portland DSA and Ty Moore from Tacoma DSA.
What I love about your campaign message and the beautiful video that delivers it is that you present such a positive vision forward. And I just love the footage of you lifting weights and talking about how you're in this fight for the long haul. It's obvious that you're physically tough, but I can tell from your communication materials that you are mentally and emotionally tough too. Where does that toughness come from? And how has it carried you through your life?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you all again for having me share a space with these amazing human beings and all of the socialists in this virtual space here. Like, I'm so geeked after a long day. I have some of my comrades who was on a part of my team who can very much tell you that video is one thing, but I was crying every other day. That toughness was only for that video. But no, like, honestly, I think that is part of like leadership, being vulnerable, because running not only as a socialist, we ran as an independent Democratic socialist in a democratically run city. So we knew not only were we going up against the forces of the ruling class, but also the extensions of that being, you know, the Democratic political establishment and the corporate establishment. And mind you, this is in a counter-revolutionary moment following the uprising, historic uprising that took place here in Minneapolis. So it was hard. I mean, my campaign stretched through the actual uprising, into the pandemic, then into Dante Wright being murdered by Brooklyn Center police, and also having an uprising take place there, segueing that into the murder of or assassination of Winston Smith by U.S. Marshals, that also followed, or that was followed by an occupation that would then lead to the murder of Deanna Marie, who was killed by a white supremacist via vehicle manslaughter. And then in one of the most brutal political seasons of literally seeing the political establishment go all in on one of the clearest demands to defund and transform public safety in Minneapolis, and recognizing the multitude of casualties we've had, especially amongst Black and brown people here in Minneapolis under the system of racial capitalism. So my campaign, and I forgot to add, Line 3, we had the Battle of Line 3 right here in our home. So we had a multitude of movements and crises that were happening under the racial capitalist state that we had to adapt to. And also, as socialists, like, we're here to provide political clarity. I think that is where the positive vision is rooted, in providing political clarity to the working class about why these crises are happening, who are the power brokers that are facilitating the management of the class, the repression of our uprisings and our movements. We end up becoming that role as all these things were happening. And that's why I want to highlight that toughness. I had a team of dedicated socialists. We studied, we analyzed every situation that came up of how the ruling class was going to respond. What clarity do we need to put out there? What medium do we want to do that? Should we do it through our podcast? Do we want to do it through the corporate media, Star Tribune, companies? Like, we had to constantly be adaptive, and I'm so glad that I didn't do it alone.
And I'm gonna stop you there, Robin, because the next question is about team and the importance of the good team, the right team. So, but thank you for that. Okay, Eve, I want to turn it over to you. Eve Seitchik, our third panelist from Somerville, Massachusetts. Eve, after I got off the phone with you a few weeks ago, I thought to myself, for a candidate who just lost a hard fought race, you are one of the happiest people I've ever talked to. Okay. You are zen. But we invited you here tonight because, you don't always win. Even when you run a smart, strategic campaign, you don't always win, and you got to get up and keep fighting anyway. And you were part of a 7-strong slate, 4 of whom won. And I think just you have so many incredible skills and experience that you took from this that you seem so willing to share with others that just really excites me. But the question that I want to ask you is about something that you tweeted. So your tweet reads, "I believe the socialist movement is powered by radical love and the bonds we have with each other." I love that. And I believe that most days, at least. Where does that love and optimism come from in you?
I mean, yeah, thank you. And thanks for having me here. It is great to be here. You can see we ran, this is a map of Somerville with our 7 roses on it. And yeah, I mean, my optimism comes from, like Robin said, that clarity that we have a program that can transform the lives of tens of millions of people, hundreds of millions of people. And we haven't convinced all of them yet, right? That we can't just ride into Washington, D.C. on a horse or something and declare that socialism is happening, right? We have a lot of work to do, and these campaigns are part of that work. And I do think it's about the bonds we make. And there are 2 kinds of those that I felt like we really built on our campaigns in Somerville. One was the connections we made with people in the community. Like, we knocked 75,000 doors between myself, Willie, and Charlotte, the other 2 at-large city council candidates who ran on a slate, which means we had about 15,000 conversations one-on-one with voters. And those were political conversations, not just, please vote for me, I'm so great, but here are the problems facing our community. Here are the ways we can transform it if we can get the political establishment that kind of wants to keep things the same as people suffer every day, within the midst of this housing crisis and COVID-19. Parts of Somerville are essentially a food desert, right? There's all these problems that people have every day that we could fix. And being able to present the democratic socialism and a way to plug into the movement and join the fight to those 15,000 conversations, that's an investment. And, we know that this struggle for a socialist world is a more than one election cycle project, right? But to build those one-on-one human connections, like I knocked thousands of doors myself, as did my comrades on the slate, and also our volunteers. Not only did they develop themselves, right, by having these conversations with voters and learning what people are really like, what their real concerns are. Everyone's got their own, right? But when you go out in the community and talk to people, you learn, and you learn how to bring the message of socialism to people. And we did that. Like, that's in the bank, right? And we get to go from here, and I'm so excited to do that. And then the other way is the bonds we have amongst each other as activists. Those, I think, are really the strength of socialists. Is it doesn't come from the patronage of rich and powerful people, right? It doesn't come from media cachet or being a famous podcaster or whatever. No offense to Robin, podcasts are good, but it comes from movements. And what that means is it's the connections of socialists to the communities that we live and work in, and then also with each other. And there really are no shortcuts, as Jane McAlevy's book says, right? Every time you convince somebody to step up and give more of their time to building the socialist program for the world and the socialist movement, and to develop themselves, and you get to know them, and you form these connections, and you fight with them, and you fight alongside them, and sometimes with them, and you build these connections with each other. And that's what keeps people in the movement, is that radical love to change the world. I'm Jewish. Another one of the candidates who was Jewish, and she talks about tikkun olam, which is to the Jewish doctrine that you were called upon to heal the world, right? And I think that's a common spirit that we have. And when you make connections with people doing that, and you fight together and you grow that movement, then, we get closer every day. And that's where my optimism comes from.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, so next I want to talk a little bit about the importance of your team, because as several of you have already pointed out, you can't do this alone. We cannot do this alone. Richie, your campaign had a huge field program and no paid campaign staff. One canvasser I talked to described going to your canvases as going to church. It was a spiritual experience. Describe to me the makeup of your team, your organizing structure, if you will, that made that possible and created the environment for that spiritual experience to take place.
Yeah, that's interesting perspective. What I would say is one thing for us was just, we had, this was the first campaign our chapter had run. All of our first like real electoral experience outside of some canvassing before Bernie, before the pandemic hit. And we just kind of dove right in head first. There was not much. We had a couple of people who knew how to cut lists, and we had worked on some issue campaigns, but other than that, we just dove in and we just did it with regularity. And I think that was a big thing for us and I think part of the going to church comment was, it's because, at this time during the week, this is what I'm doing every single week. And the way that, if you go to church, every Sunday at 9 a.m., that's where you are. And so, it was every Saturday at 10:30 for us, but, it ended up just being our DSA chapter. There was nothing complicated about it. If you were in our DSA chapter, you were invited. We obviously invited wider community supporters, anyone who was interested in progressive politics in general, and so we invited them out, and every weekend we got together and we knocked on doors and we trained people. And then when we were done, we sat in the park and had pizza, or I got Taco Bell one time. That wasn't popular. And we would just pick up food and we would sit in the park and have food and drinks and have a good time. And it really became more of like, the work is why we're here. But the community is why we keep coming back, really. And so, and we built a great community, and I think that's what was most important for us to be able to do something. I mean, I know, yeah, we knocked a lot of doors. I think in the end, it was around 30,000. And, I hear these campaigns knocked a lot of doors as well. Everyone's campaign here did. But I'm really proud of what we accomplished, because I don't know that there's ever been anything like this done here. And it was our first attempt to jump up off the couch and go knock 30,000 doors. Was insane. So I'm really grateful for everybody who participated in that. And I had an amazing time. Two things I'll leave you with is one, you asked about our team, and, it really just started out being me and my wife, Miranda, who's on the steering committee of our chapter. And we worked hard together on it. Both really enjoy this work and enjoy doing it together. And then any DSA member that took an interest in it, we got a leadership role is basically it. And that's how we moved forward. And then the last thing I'll leave you with is just an example of how I enjoyed it. I was speaking with a new council member-elect like myself, and the mayor-elect here. And mayor-elect comes up to me and the other council member that were speaking and was like, "All right, y'all ready to campaign again?" And expecting us to, "Oh no, that was so tough, blah blah blah." And the other council member was like, "Oh, I'm so tired, I'm glad that's over." Well, and I was like, "Yeah, I'm ready to knock some doors right now. I will go knock doors right now." I don't think they realized I wasn't kidding when I said I had a really good time and I was enjoying the campaign because of the way that we had done it. And so they looked.
You don't sound lazy to me, Richie.
Yeah, well, I think my friend Jamie's on here, and he told me I should just start saying yeah, I'm a lazy socialist, but I'll fight like hell so I don't have to go to work anymore. And so that you don't have to go to work anymore really is what's more important. Yeah. So
Okay,
Yeah,
thank
anyway,
you. Thank you.
that's how it was.
Thank you. Robin, tell us about your core team. Who were they? What type of experience did they bring and leadership did they bring? And how did y'all interact?
Mm-hmm. So as I mentioned in my opening, we ran an insurgent campaign being an independent democratic socialist and doing so with the goal of building independent political power. And we knew the Democratic establishment would not take lightly to that. So I was very fortunate that many of the folks on my team, many of folks who are on this call, either in an advisory role or core role, shout out to Ty, shout out to Kip, shout out to Celeste. These are folks who I've been in struggle with from 2015 around the Fight for 15 movement, thanks to Shama Sawant, independent socialist who just defeated her recall out in Seattle, helped to bring that movement here. We led that fight victoriously here with other socialists at the helm of it. But I'm also grateful that even before that, I have my sis Celeste on here who was involved in Occupy Homes, Kip, who had led the Fight for 15 at the airport and unionization drives for airport workers. These are people who had taken up fights against the ruling class in a multitude of ways. And by the way, these are ordinary people like Kip, baggage handler by day, superhero by night. Celeste, your favorite MVP, like bartender, but like fucking up shit by night. Like literally, these are people who not only know how to orchestrate and build working class power at the grassroots level, but again, have a political analysis of what we're up against. And what was so great about having people who were already involved in classist struggle that had experience in working on independent socialist campaigns like Ty Moore back in 2013 here in Minneapolis and Ginger Jensen, who would then come in 2017. By the time we formed my campaign apparatus, we were able to have a threshold of leadership to welcome new DSA members. And I'm talking about people who just had joined, never been active in any fight, and also challenging this dynamic that I think a lot of DSA chapters experience, this paralysis and fear to organize in working class communities, to take on bold issues. And we had teams of folks here being like, look, I took on Delta. Look, I took on the big business. We made major wins and we can do that here. This campaign is only an extension of that. The electoral is not an end all be all, but here's a way to get your feet wet. And here's a way to build a vehicle, not only in through DSA, but in City Hall to actually build a pulpit for working class struggles. So, I mean, we became an introductory like class organizing experience for a lot of new DSA members. And mind you, they got a dirty crash because we had all these counter-revolutionary moments that were happening and we had to be super adaptive. And I'm glad that I had a team that could walk everyone through very patiently, because we all have been there. We all have been confronted by police repression, didn't know what the hell to do. So it was good to have a team that was grounded in a strong socialist analysis, that was studious. We would read and do political education with our team, and also process these political events and then say, how is this going to relate to our campaign? How do we need to restructure our conversations at the doors? Let's print out our own public safety plan as this vacuum around public safety is happening and opposition is monopolizing it. What if we took that vacuum and put out our own democratic socialist, a Black democratic socialist proposal for public safety, make a zine out of it, and then use that as literature at the doors? And that actually helped to translate voter increase to 50% for our public safety amendment to transform and replace the police department. So it's so imperative to have that politically sounded team. And I'm glad I had my folks who I've been in struggle with and knew how to do that and train other folks up as we built this power together.
Excellent. Excellent. Okay, Eve, borrowing from New York City's experience, you ran a slate and pooled your resources to put together a campaign that looked quite different than I think Robin's and Richie's. Tell us about your unique campaign structure and what worked with it and maybe what you do differently next time around.
Sure. Yeah, no, totally. So I think, one thing, I shout out to fellow independent socialist, Robin, and also Kshama Sawant, who is always saying, our movement's socialist city council seat, right? It's like this sort of asset that the socialist movement has, to have an elected seat, which we can use to persuade people and start messy political fights with the ruling class over key issues like 15 now and other kind of this obvious stuff that we should have that the ruling class doesn't want us to have, right? So this whole idea of what would it mean for Boston DSA to take on a kind of campaign that's oriented towards that, to having people who are really our people, and how do we win that, and how do we do that in a sort of collective, rational way, like good socialists, right? And that really guided everything from when we recruited candidates. I said I would do it because I had been saying we had to run our own members for too long, and then I got made to do it. And then we were able to find Willie and Charlotte and Becca, who we ran in West Somerville, Becca Miller from the National DSA Eco-Socialist Committee, Tessa Bridge in the center of the city. And we just got like all these people together, and we're like, okay, how are we going to do this? And three of us, myself, Willie, and Charlotte, were running at large. And we were thinking about staff and how we could pool our resources, because the territory we were running in was the same territory. We're running basically the same race. Every voter got to tick 4 names on the ballot. We wanted 3 of those names to be the 3 of us. So we were like, how can we do this? And we started in like December of 2020. And we did trust building exercises. We talked about our childhoods. We were vulnerable with each other. We really got to know each other. We talked about what we wanted out of this campaign, what we were going to do in office, what parts it was so important to have us have individual control over. Like, I wanted to say, okay, maybe we can agree on this joint platform, but I want to be able to go beyond that in places, right? I want, like, they're registered Democrats. I really identify the Democratic Party in Somerville as something I wanted to run against. Like, one of our nastiest, most negative opponents is a Democratic State Committee person, right? And the operatives who were opposing the DSA slate were like local Democratic Party board committee people, right? So it was like a really important to me to do that. And that wasn't the language or the approach that they wanted to do, right? So we had to hash all of these things out. But what we decided was that what would make sense is to hire a joint staff. I think part of that, for the 3 of us, we ended up hiring 2 people. We decided that we wanted them both to be field people. So we had a field director and a data director. We hired our field director was an elected member of Boston DSA's electoral organizing committee. Sinead O'Hara's total rock star. She gave the field pitch from the Strokes concert during the Bernie campaign in New Hampshire to the crowd assembled there. She's a core DSA member in Boston, right? So we hired her. We hired Sam Goldstein, who is, and these are both folks who had worked on the Bernie campaign at a statewide level. So, and they really knew their stuff, as well as organizing locally and being Boston DSA members. So that was something we really took for the New York comrades, is to really have this crossover between core members of the chapter's electoral apparatus and the staff for the campaign. That really like helped knit those projects together. But the other thing was, we wanted to have them have like a workplace. I think sometimes on small campaigns, when you hire one person, it can lead to like, there are a lot of stories, not just on small campaigns, but on supposedly left-wing electoral campaigns where staff have like horrible, even abusive experiences, right? And we knew that we were intending to set out to build a totally different kind of environment. But we knew that in order to do that, we really had to put our money where our mouth is. So, none of us have ever been anyone's boss, right? That's not who we are. It's not how we do it. And that's not the kind of environment we want to have. But at the end of the day, you're signing your staff's checks, right? So you do have this kind of structural power over them. And so we wanted to make sure that since we couldn't individually have multiple staffers, we thought it would really help to have a little staff workplace where they could like talk to each other and complain about us and organize stuff like that, to bring concerns to us. So that was really baked into the way that we did it. And we'd also have these kind of weekly or biweekly like high councils with all 7 of us talking about our joint strategy across the city. And also at all of those meetings were like the 12 people of Boston DSA's elected electoral organizing committee. And we talked about how DSA members are being mobilized. We made joint decisions about like whose canvases were getting targeted this week for mobilization, how to shift resources around. And we built this kind of hybrid DSA 7 campaigns, for me, Willie and Charlotte, 3 campaigns in one kind of slate system. And there's more that I could say. I'll leave it there. But, like we had a whole system of how we would rotate through the different precincts so we wouldn't step on each other's toes and where the volunteers were going. It was just all very like engineered.
Highly coordinated.
Yeah.
And impressive. Yeah. Very interesting. Okay. So thank you, Eve. And so my final questions are about, we can't do this alone, right? Let's discuss some of the support that you organized outside of your local DSA chapter. So all of you I know have mentioned having some labor union support as key to your victories. And I know that there were some other groups that played similar roles in terms of on the ground support. So Richie, how did outside support make a difference in your campaign? What was effective, and then how did you organize that support in the first place?
Yeah, this is actually really important to bring up because I mentioned, of course, DSA was the core of our campaign, ran our field program, were the people most involved. But this was really a coalition effort. We had to get 30,000 votes, and that's a huge task for a DSA chapter with 250 members. And so it really was important to us. One, not just, to help us win, but 2, to show what kind of coalition we're going into office with and who really is on our team. And so that started particularly with, I'd say, 2 groups. One is organized labor. And organized labor was very supportive of the campaign, was there 100%. Supported us mostly through financial means and their communications to their members. And, that wasn't a guarantee, but what the reason why that was we were so successful with that was because our chapter has worked really hard to have a good relationship with labor, to, be there for labor when they need activist support, push them in the right direction when they're maybe not looking the right way. We've got plenty of rabble rousers in our chapter as well. So, but I mean, it was not guaranteed. One of the labor unions that endorsed me had also endorsed a Republican. And so, it goes to show that, the scary socialism is it's not the boogeyman that you think it is if you really know people and if you've worked with them and they know you. And so I think that made a big difference. And so, yeah, organized labor was really crucial for us. And, it was one of the first endorsements I got, and it legitimized the campaign immediately. If you get the labor council's endorsement immediately, people know that you're a contender. And so, before that, I was just some kid, because I'm the youngest person ever elected to city council. I was just some kid running around talking about socialism, and I'm going to get elected. And as soon as they got on board, everybody was like, oh, wait, this person is serious. And so that was a big thing. And, SEIU is not a part of the Labor Council, but they went really hard as well. They put up a billboard at one point that had me on it. And we had progressive organizations here. One called Florida Rising that really focuses on housing issues that did some canvassing for us, and another one called Dream Defenders, which is a Black and Indigenous led organization based in Florida. They will say they're openly socialist, a little different from DSA because they are like a nonprofit model, but they're a socialist organization as well. And they went very hard for our campaign. Actually, I know they went to Minneapolis not too long ago and we're doing things up there as well. So I'll have to look into that too. But they went really hard. They knocked a lot of doors as well for us, maybe an equivalent to what the campaign did. And so really it was a coalition effort. And I'm sure I'm missing other groups as well that did a lot for us. And so, we had to build that broad coalition, but still stick to our values. And that's what we did.
And Robin, I heard that you built a lot of connections with Chicago DSA and in other chapters. What role did your national connections play in your campaign?
I think it was very imperative to our campaign to demonstrate to working class people here that we're extension of a national movement. Like socialism, socialist movement isn't just bubbling up here or in New York. Like this is happening all across the country. Working class people are rising up and building alternatives to racial capitalism. And we wanted to highlight, like, look, we're a part of that. Like, yeah, and we're going to bring that into City Hall here. And we want you to join us in this fight. So I have to say, you know, because many of my team members have been in struggle with, you know, groups like DSA and Socialist Alternative in the past on a number of key fights, from rent control to the fight for 15 to Occupy. We had these connections, like, for instance, shout out again to Ty Moore. You know, he rallied together Seattle DSA members to host our first meet and greet, where we raised, I think, over 1,500. And mind you, again, running as an independent socialist, our campaign raised close to $95,000. And that was an average $30 donation. And mind you, our little, I mean, 95 is cool, but that 95 would then go to beat out our corporate establishment back candidate, who raised 150,000. So every single dollar counts. And so fundraising was such a crucial component to, like, our socialist comrades, demonstrating solidarity, as well as being part of our program. You mentioned Chicago. I was super, super excited to have the endorsement of the Chicago Socialist Caucus. By the way, I'm originally from Chicago, so it was so imperative to show. And one of the other beasts of capitalism, you know, Chicago itself, we have a socialist movement there. And we have elected officials who are ready to build with us for a future of public safety beyond policing, housing justice, climate justice. And they also have a fundraiser for us too, and was willing to come down and door knock and provide political analysis and strategies of how we deal with, like, the Democratic Party, like, throwing bullshit our way. As well as, again, I want to highlight Shama Sawan again. Shama Sawan was one of the earlier folks to come out in my campaign to support us and do a panel actually on rent control, and a panel on what it's like to have socialist council members in City Hall. She did that with also Byron Sitcho Lopez. And closer to the election, I was really, really excited to bring my fellow sis and comrade, India Walton, on for a Facebook Live forum, where we got to talk about our respective struggles as Black Democratic Socialists going up against politically establishment candidates in democratically governed cities, trying to build a working class, like, movement there. So again, every step of the way, we wanted to show that we are not alone, especially as people of color. The idea that socialism is for white folks, that's a lie. We have Black and brown folks, immigrant communities that are building socialist power, working class power all across the city. And that's how you actually push forth and demonstrate strength behind your positive vision. When working class people know we are not isolated, we are not alone in this fight. And we got people who a whole squad of folks we can call upon to join us in these fights for rent control and against the capitalist state. So I'm so grateful for my socialists and helping us get this victory.
Wonderful. And rent control passed, right, in Minneapolis, in St. Paul. Passed in St. Paul. You guys set the groundwork for it in Minneapolis.
Clarification, yes, there are strong rent control passed in St. Paul. The pathway to pursue a strong rent control policy passed there in Minneapolis, and we're going to fight to make that happen here.
Right on. Your number one focus, right? We get in, start your term. Okay, Eve, last question to you. So your I lost my question here, Eve. Outside support, what was the most important to you, most important to your campaign?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if this counts as outside support, but the national DSA endorsement was really big. I know the National Electoral Committee really took it to another level with their, like, national fundraising and doing events and stuff. And that was actually really big. We really felt that. And honestly, we raised a lot of money that way, as well as from our local DSA chapter. And like Robin says, you know, each $10 or even the 1/40th of $10 that someone gave to the whole national DSA slate, like, that matters. And that was big. But our biggest local coalition partners on the ground were Our Revolution Somerville. Somerville was one of the only places in the metro Boston area where Bernie beat Hillary in 2016. It's this little spot of green on the blue part of the map. And they're really well established in local politics, and they're these kind of like Bernie-crats who have a lot to agree with us, especially the kind of like left wing of our revolution, Somerville. And we found they were kind of in some ways more deeply rooted in the community than we are. They skew a little older. They had folks who had lived in the city for longer than some of like, because it's really expensive to rent in Somerville, and people are moving around. Boston area is broken up into all these little cities, so people would move from Somerville to Cambridge to Boston proper, and then to Malden or Medford, and then back to Somerville. So some of the folks, it was like they would hold our canvases at their house, and they like knew a lot of people in town, and they were all in for us because we're all part of this kind of bigger democratic socialist movement, and a lot of us,
Beautiful.
including me, Charlotte, and Willie, came out of the Bernie experience in kind of an important way, right? So I think that's those connections were important. Also, our local high school has a Sunrise Youth chapter, so it's like seeing these kind of like 16-year-old like young organizers at our canvases, and talking to them and learning from them, and also having them the opportunity to learn from our kind of socialist politics and our approach was a really cool part of it too. So
Awesome.
definitely was big.
Awesome. Okay, Ty, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Leigh. Thanks to Richie, Robin, and Eve for laying out how your campaigns were organized and what brought you to the struggle and brought you to this important work. So for the second part of this discussion, I'm hoping we can dig more into the complicated political terrain that each of your campaigns confronted. Obviously, you've dealt with this somewhat already, but I know a central challenge facing socialist candidates, and I know you all consider yourselves Marxists, is how to develop a platform and message capable of winning a majority of working class and middle class voters that you need to win the election, but how to do this while maintaining a principled socialist message and policies. So, to win, you had to deal with also the very real pressures from the establishment, from more conservative voters, to water down your platform or to pay it in a good way to say things in a more understandable fashion, but also face pressures from activists who that your activist base who've adopted their own language and slogans that may not, hit the right mark with certain sections of the working class communities you need to win. So I'll start with you, Robin. I know your campaign emerged in many ways out of the uprising for Black lives following the murder of George Floyd. And among activists, the slogan for defunding and abolishing the police was really dominant. But, I think we had several conversations how the Black community was divided on that issue, and working class people in general were divided. So you had a situation where there was a referendum to dismantle the Minneapolis Police Department and replace it with something new. And that lost, but your campaign won. So what lessons do you draw from that? How did you navigate that terrain?
Yeah, I think what is also very important, as Marxists and socialists and also as independent, for us to be able to be willing to have debates with movements about our platforms. And that's something that I am proud about our campaign. Earlier before the public safety referendum that you're referring to came into public view, we actually engaged with in the debate with the movement leaders behind the language, and said that we cannot reduce this language towards just policing alone. That is going to be weaponized by the ruling class to say that, okay, why do we need to do anything different? Let's just put some more Band-Aids, some more wallpaper on Minneapolis Police Department, and we good. We already got a Black chief, which y'all talking about dismantling. So we made it very clear, you have to present a broader program around this message to replace the the Minneapolis Department of Public Safety. And that proposal was not, picked up in that debate. And what I'm glad about having our independence is that, okay, we took that on as a campaign. That's when we developed our own public safety plan that I referenced earlier. That's when we produced our own campaign literature where we talked about, okay, what does it look like to tangibly invest into a new public safety infrastructure, and making sure that it's grounded in this political correction of bringing Black and brown, immigrants, women, LGBTQ, everyone that is ostracized from the public back into the public. That is the only way we're going to have a standardized service of public safety in the system. And that means having to then stabilize these communities that we've heavily divested in. That means, again, taking the fights, which in Minneapolis, we had the referendum on rent control that was happening. So we made calls to that of like, oh, by the way, when we stabilize housing in our communities, we know public safety, or if you isolate it to like the right-wing rhetoric, crime goes down. When we're investing in livable wages, instead of allocating more funding to the Downtown Big Business Council, then we see crime goes down. Like, we have to couple whatever public safety proposals we're doing with mass investments into the public infrastructure. And that resonated with folks on the doors, and also broadening. I mean, we put out bold demands too of saying this means expanding the unarmed workforce. And we used the data that the city even created internally that showed, more than 70% of our 911 calls doesn't require someone showing up with a gun. Therefore, let's use the money or tax the rich to provide money to hire more social workers, mental health providers, so that we actually have professionals, especially people who got thousands of dollars of student debt, to like become experts in these fields. Let's bring them into this public infrastructure to actually provide these crisis response services. So people at the doors was like, what? Your old 60-year-old white man was like, oh, that totally makes sense. So like, of course, the 18-year-old college student who was like, well, I'm ready to burn it down. Like, so I think it was very smart for us to develop our own program. And also we had a canvassing apparatus to test it. So when we use something at the doors, if we didn't get good feedback, again, we have these political debates and discussions amongst my team. We'll then discuss, okay, what do we need to change about this? Go out and test it again. So we were constantly making these adjustments. And I think it did, again, yield in the fact that we drove out at least 50% of the vote in our ward towards favoring question 2, the public safety amendment, because people was like, oh, wait, this is not the end of the world. We don't have to settle for the status quo of policing. We actually deserve better. And we have a candidate in our ward who's going to fight for it with us.
Appreciate it. Yep. That's excellent. Richie, you won as a socialist in the South, and I'm betting a majority of your constituents probably still, if they were polled, wouldn't say that they consider themselves socialists or have a positive attitude towards socialism. Maybe I'm wrong, or don't know St. Pete as well. But how did you navigate that contradiction of trying to appeal to a broad audience as an open socialist in the South?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what a poll would say. I'd be interested to see, actually, but because I think it might be an intriguing answer. But I think there's a couple of things. First is that it was pretty clear after our primary election that, when people, bludgeon you with the word socialism, they're really trying to motivate, I don't know, maybe a right-wing base of people to come out and vote against you. And after our primary election, we did very well in the primary election, and Republican turnout in our district, because it was just a district vote in the primary, was down compared to the rest of the city. And so it got pretty clear pretty quickly that it didn't exactly motivate people to come out and vote against you. It's the words that people use are just made to scare you, not necessarily as effective as you'd think they are. So that's one thing that was kind of interesting. But we didn't, and I know that other people have taken another tact, go up to the door and be like, hey, I'm the socialist, vote for me because I'm a socialist. We recognize, like, I don't think our community is going to be there right now, but our community will respond positively to a message of basically exactly what we think municipal democratic socialism is. And so we just came and led with that message. And I think, people respond, and working class people respond positively to it. And we saw that very clearly. What I would say is that another important thing is you have to really connect to the community. If they feel that you actually care about them, that they can trust you because you're a part of their community, you're organizing in there, they know you because you've knocked on the door, somebody else has knocked on the door. That goes a long way here in Florida. I think in my life I've been canvassed No, I don't think I've ever been canvassed. I think I might have been canvassed one time years ago by a Republican. I think I've had lit dropped at my house, but like to knock on doors to the scale that we did, even to like 1/10 of the scale that we did, is absolutely unheard of. And so the fact that we were here, like actually communicating with people, meant that anything that they'd be worried about in the first place is going to be severely dissipated or extremely dissipated, because they know me or one of my close friends that knocked on their door, and they were invited. One thing we did was we invited the entire district to come to a meet and greet event. Like, we canvassed every single house in the district and had an event literally within like a half a mile of their house for like 6 weeks. We did that straight, and we held like 6 different events across the district. It might have been more like 12. So that was one thing. And people responded to that message and to the way that we did it and the way that we tried to ingrain ourselves in the community. And one final thing I'll say is that when you saw the results come back, it was clear that our votes came from the most working class areas of the city. And we were proud of that. Our votes came from the most diverse areas of the city. The majority Black districts in the city voted for us. And so it was clear that the people that we wanted to build a coalition around are the people who responded, to the point where even working class white areas that voted Republican in every other race in the city except for ours, and voted for the DSA member in that race. And so it was clear that when we led with what our values were right away, that people responded positively. And we probably lost people who, because of the word democratic socialism in right-leaning places, but honestly, I think we lost more people because of democratic socialism in left-leaning places, places where there are a lot of Democrats, but the Democrats are better off, more wealthy and stuff, is places we lost that we thought we might be able to win. And then we won in places that were more right-leaning. So it was kind of surprising, but it was nice to see that if you really get to know people, and people feel like, maybe we don't agree on everything, but this person's in my community and knocked on my door. It's one thing that people said to us is like, we tried to reach out to some Republicans at one point, and they said things like, we saw you in the park across the street from our house every week for a month canvassing. We know you work hard, and we came in, and so we're voting for you. And so it just makes a difference if you're really part of the community, I think. And I think that's one of the things that DSA has going for it, is we're not afraid to go out and talk to people, and that's a real way to connect.
That's huge. Yeah. And I think, as you said, a class message, when you kind of get it right away from this liberal right-left divide, can be really powerful in cutting across the traditional partisan lines. And that's an amazing example. So Eve, you had the challenge that you've already spoken to a bit, but of bringing together a multi-tenancy DSA slate of 7 candidates on a common platform. And, so you're navigating both the internal politics of DSA and a platform, but then of course that platform can't just make DSA happy. It has to make a majority of voters also support you. So how did you kind of bring that together? What were the challenges? Was there anything you thought got compromised?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of it was when you run people who are core DSA members and not just like progressives out there that you found that you think are pretty good, you have the advantage of running candidates who have sort of come up in DSA's debates, or kind of have gotten their experience by campaigning alongside DSA and as part of our campaigns, and have been through our political education, right? So I think we had a good starting point, maybe compared to other socialist campaigns. But yeah, there were a lot of discussions, and we had a lot of really nuanced debates. Some of us ended up using the word defund on our literature. Some of us didn't, right? I was one of the ones who did. We had a lot of these discussions, but I think that ultimately what got communicated to, and we did have a joint platform, but my at-large slate with Willie and Charlotte was called Somerville for All. And what we decided to take as kind of our joint points of agreement was these different, for all, so like housing for all, public safety for all, transit for all, and infrastructure for all. And we had these policy platforms that we all agreed on. Maybe when in my individual messaging, maybe I emphasized social housing more, right, than another candidate, right? So there were these differences. On the other hand, though, I think what really got communicated to voters was that there are these DSA people running in Somerville. There are 7 of them. They're young, probably, that got through. Although I think, half of us were in our 30s. And they want to do big stuff. Like, they want to change things, right? They are not satisfied with the constraints that we supposedly have on meeting people's needs, and they're going to try to smash all of those and reorient the city's priorities. And then we had this kind of center-left opposition, who I think voters saw as like the usual nice liberals who run the city at a snail's pace, and like that really was the choice that was framed up in voters' minds. So I think that as most people were making their decisions, it wasn't even so much about like, well, what is this programmatic point or that programmatic point? It was like, how bad do I think things are? And this got to what Richie was saying, like when we would talk to people who are really well off and we're like, yeah, we want to change Somerville and change these things. And they're like, well, I think Somerville's great. And it's like, yeah, that's because like you're white and you live in a $1 million house. Like, I don't know what to tell you, but like, I don't know how to make you feel compassion for your neighbors who are suffering, but we tried, like that was our angle with those people, is to kind of open their eyes about what was really happening just half a mile from them, right? And when we had mixed results, like, vote, I'm sure we picked up votes and opened people's eyes, right? But there were other places where we didn't. So in the end, I think we solidified around this, we called it Sidewalk Socialism, which was, I think that phrase was invented by a Boston DSA electoral working group co-chair, who's also a friend of mine. And it was picked up in a 2019 Cambridge City Council campaign by Jeevan Sabrina Wheeler. And it was inspired because she wanted the sidewalks to be plowed. Right in Somerville, you have to shovel your own sidewalks, and nobody does it. And God help you if you're trying to get around in a wheelchair in the winter. And senior citizens have to shovel their own sidewalks, which is like this big public health problem because people have like undiagnosed heart conditions. And there's this whole thing. We wanted to create good union jobs. We wanted to expand public services, plow sidewalks. But that was like this kind of emblematic thing of the billions of dollars we wanted to like $1 billion was a lot for Somerville. We wanted to invest in improving the sewers and all of this other like big investments in the public infrastructure that would affect people's day-to-day lives, matching people's food stamp benefits, like just this nuts and bolts stuff. And we want to be like, this is this really concrete way that this will change your lives that the ruling class just doesn't want to do because they don't want to spend money on public services. They want to spend money on things that benefit big business. And that's just as true about the sort of center-left Democrats who run the city and have to date as it is about like big business Republicans. And we're here to change that. And I think that core message resonated, and that's why we picked up seats in this election. I think having more message discipline actually would have helped. I think going back again, I think it would have been harder to really smash into each other even harder and really try to get all on one consistent message, because we did all have our different bits and pieces, and that was important to us. But now that we've built more trust and we've been through this together, I think it would have actually been more effective, even if it would be harder to go even deeper into this question of a multi-tenancy slate arriving on a shared platform and have more of a 7-person wide mega shared platform with real message discipline. I think that actually would have been helpful.
Awesome. Well, you guys have been giving such amazing answers that we're a little over time. So we're going to skip the second round of questions and go to the final question before turning it over to the audience. So, and this is maybe a complicated one. So also if you need a couple more minutes, we can understand, but you're about to, or two of you are about to enter office, and Eve, you're going to be part of the leadership of a DSA chapter that has 4 council members on the Somerville City Council. And so it brings up a lot of questions. It's been debated widely in DSA of how to keep candidates accountable. What's the relationship between being an office holder as a socialist, the movement, et cetera. And, the controversy that I'm sure everybody's aware of around Jamal Bowman's vote to fund the Israeli military, Iron Dome, that's been widely debated. That the vote itself has been pretty universally condemned in DSA, but what to do about it has been quite a sharp debate that's made national headlines and brought this issue, to a head. We're not here to talk about Jamal Bowman tonight, but it brings up this wider question of whether and how DSA endorsed candidates should be held accountable to DSA's platform. And this an issue will undoubtedly come up for you all. You both represent constituents and you come out of DSA. So how do you handle it is a question. And Eve, we'll start with you. I know you aren't personally taking office, but with as continuing part of the leadership of the Boston Somerville DSA, what do you think your relationship to the comrades you just ran on a slate with is going to be, and how do you support them, but also how do you hold them accountable to the platform?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. It's something we've thought about a lot. I mean, I think from inception, this is something that's so inspiring about Richie and Robin, is that, the best way to have the candidates do what you want is for the candidates to just be you, right? To just be DSA, right? In their bones, to be democratic socialists who have a movement orientation. I mean, Bernie is this inspiring figure who has made this like historic impact on US socialism, right? And Not Me Us, so powerful. It brought so many of us into movements. But Bernie was always kind of a go at his own kind of guy in terms of his relationship with movements, right? He was this person of powerful moral fiber who's out there alone on the Senate floor, like holding it down for decades, like through the darkness, right? And I think that was what we needed then, and it's not what we need now. I think DSA really needs people who see themselves as co-governing with movements and with organizations, right? I think one thing that's DSA, what's so good about DSA in particular, is that it's a democratic member-run organization and not just sort of the democratic socialist movement. So structures of like real accountability and candidates who understand that sort of co-governing, like there's an actual elected committee of socialists you can talk to and consult with, right? And I guess I see myself, since when I've been sort of reimagining what my next 2 years are going to be like after thinking it was going to be one way. But I think what's ended up on my plate that I'm really excited about is being this bridge between our 4 candidates who won and our DSA chapter, which, I was co-chair of for 2 years, right? And I have these strong relationships, like I said in the tweet that Leigh was asking me about in the beginning, these bonds of solidarity and love and trust really are what powers our movements. And we built a lot of those between DSA activists, DSA candidates, me, our staff, like there's all this stuff. That got kind of all mixed together and powerfully strengthened during the campaign. And we're going to be leaning on that. And I imagine I'll have a role to play in that and keeping those connections strong, because it's even if you elect people who are DSA activists, you got to keep those relationships going, and you got to prove over and over again why it's so important to co-govern with movements. So we're going to approach that with the same ferocity that we approach the campaign with.
So I'll kick it to Robin next. You're in office with 2 other DSA members. You didn't necessarily run as a slate together, but I know you've been meeting and discussing with both of them. But at the same time, the Minneapolis City Council, before you even arrived, was a deeply divided council with sort of a liberal Democratic wing and a more big business establishment wing. So it poses a question: how do you maintain sort of a distinct socialist bloc and pole that has its own policies, and not just get wrapped and subsumed into council's liberal wing? And I'll just, this is taken from a question that I was asking before that we skipped over, but one of the biggest challenges we have as socialists sometimes is even we use a socialist label, but that doesn't necessarily mean people think we're any different than the lying pack of liars that promise good stuff and then never deliver. And voters are really fed up and frustrated with a lot of liberal Democrats. So we have to sometimes block with Democrats against the right wing, but block with our liberal against the right wing. But how do you maintain your independence and a socialist profile with your comrades on the council?
Yeah, I think Eve raised something that's very important. I mean, and kind of what I've highlighted earlier is, my team, we're organizers first. So our entire platform, like, it's one thing to say it, but we also know in order to actually see rent control, a strong rent control. And that's actually one of the issues that's going to be a testing ground for my socialist, caucus and the rest of the liberal DFLers or Democrats who got elected in the big business, establishment wing of our council. That's going to be a real fight, because right now we are already seeing some of the liberal Democrats And the big business ones are just like, nah, we're not even going to entertain this. Liberal Democrats are like, well, what if we watered it down so much that it don't really make a difference in the lives of renters, but we could say we passed something. And here, my independent self having to go, because again, I'm on the ground, my team is on the ground. We're having meetings with the coalitions that's organizing and have been organizing for rent control. Like, we're coming in and blowing up the meetings every time they're talking about, what about we make? No concessions, no. And if you do, just know, as you've seen, we have no problem putting your betrayal of working class people out to the public. We will put you in a Star Tribune so quick, or on our own media being like, well, you want to know why you got a concession on this? It's because Councilmember XYZ decided to sell you out. Like, I mean, at this point, like, it's a political fight. And I think it's going to be imperative for, the Socialist Caucus or Socialist post late to really, in order to not get to that point, we have to ground ourselves in the movements that's doing the work. And that's why I'm glad, as part of my office, and also kind of following Shama Sawant's own legacy, my staff and I, we're going to take a portion of our salary to donate it and create an office in our ward, because most council members do not get that, so that we can actually create an organizing hub, so we can have resources to support canvassing for rent control right in our communities or all across the city, so we can support mutual aid efforts and all the other type of ways in which working class people are organizing. We want our office to be a hub and a base of support for that. By the way, I'm gonna drop a link in the chat too, because we're trying to raise $5,000 for that and we're halfway through. But like, that's one of the ways in which we're gonna hold ourselves accountable. When people, our labor folks ask us to show up for a picket line, we're gonna make sure we're there. How can we also use our office to amplify these demands that working class people are organizing around? So I think that's gonna be contingent for us. I mean, really imperative for us. And also, I think something for DSA to consider too is, I mean, how do we utilize the grievance process? Like, I think my team has no problem being called in if we are straying off. So I think it is important for our chapter to also figure out what is that process when, our council members, our socialist council members are not honoring the platform. How do we get called in? And again, how do you get called out after we've done called you in and you still doing shiesty stuff? Like, you got to get called out. And I don't mind that either. So I think there's a multitude of ways to kind of hold socialist feet to the fire. And we should not, retreat from that. We have to, because the pressures of big business, the ruling class, is so heavy. It's so easy to capitulate into City Hall, all these forces. We're going to need to have our feet planted in movements, in working class spaces. Like, we're going to have to do that intentionally and also do that collaboratively with our DSA comrades.
Wonderful. So Richie, you get last word before we open it up to audience questions. You are, as the only socialist voice on your council, you're undoubtedly going to get the advice that, similar to what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez famously said. She got pulled in and said, okay, it's one thing to be an activist and campaigner, but if you don't play nice with your colleagues, life's going to be rough for you. You're not going to get anything done. And that plays out at the local level too. At the same time, the goal of keeping good relations with your colleagues can sometimes exert a big pressure to avoid public criticism of them when they make rotten compromises. So how do you plan to navigate that? It's not a straightforward question, but what are you thinking about as you prepare to take your first steps into City Hall?
Yeah, so no, this is a straightforward question because it's incredibly important. I was reading the City Council manual this week that was given to me, and literally there's an entire section about being civil in it. And so, and how you be polite, and this is a professional workplace and stuff like that. And like, and today even I had to go in for a committee meeting before getting sworn in so we could talk about who was going to be the next city council chair. And we had to vote for the next city council chair, and it immediately became contentious. And I had to say things like, I've been taking the strategy. This is myself personally. I've been taking the strategy of open, honest, like, and that's what I've been this whole time, is open and honest about where I'm coming from, where I'm going to go, because our council's had like factions get built up and nothing gets done because they just vote no when everybody else says it. But that's because they're not operating like politically or ideologically. They're operating from an egoist place, and that's not what I'm here to do. I'm here because I have a political agenda, and this is the difference between what we've done really and what a lot of other people who have gotten elected to council in our town have done, is that, you know, it's unusual for you to even really have politics when you're campaigning for city council. It was different for us to be like, no, these are the policies we're proposing. These are the types of ordinances we're going to pass. That was out of the norm. There were people who got elected who didn't even have like an issues page on their campaign Facebook page or their campaign website. And so I actually think that having politics makes it a little bit easier, because I can look at the person that's sitting, you know, down the dais from me and be like, I am doing this because you know where I stand on things. Like, you know, I'm here to make sure that we build working class power, that working class people have better lives, and that we're making this a better city for the people who actually need it to be a better city for. And so that actually goes a long way towards keeping things from getting too personal. Now, when it comes to, oh, my colleague is screwing over working people and needs to be called out on that, I'm not even sure that it needs to be my job to do that. Obviously it does. Obviously I'm a part of it. But what's more important is that my agenda in city council is not Richie Floyd's agenda. It's working people's agenda. And if you're not answering to working people, like, it doesn't matter that you're not answering to Richie Floyd. It matters that you're not answering to those groups. And I can say, like, you know, our city is run by Democrats as well. And those Democrats were also endorsed by the AFL-CIO. They were also endorsed by the environmental organizations that are asking for a lot more than they're getting right now. And that makes things really easy on me, because if I'm trying to give people what they've been asking for years, and they've been told compromise is necessary, and I'm there saying no, compromise isn't necessary, and I'm proposing those things, and that my colleagues aren't, you know, it's an interesting situation, because those same people may not back my colleagues next time. And so I guess this goes sort of to the accountability, and the whole theme of this question is that, like, you know, if we're in there operating not based off of what we need for ourselves, we're operating on what, you know, the movements that we're a part of, the movement that we're a part of is about. It's a whole different perspective. It's a paradigm shift, really. And so that's where I'll keep my feet. That's why we built the coalition we did to get elected, and we're gonna be answerable to right away. And I think one last thing I'll throw in is that I think that when we think about accountability, it's often like sort of a reactive thing to what somebody's done when someone's done something wrong. And I believe we should spend a lot more time thinking about how do we create the structure so that the people that we put into these positions can never do anything wrong, because they're part of us. They are us. And so and that, you know, honestly, what that looks like is deep organizing in our community, making sure we're connected to these people. Like you brought up earlier, there's no shortcuts to this work. Often electoral politics, you know, we're just trying to get elected and we'll take shortcuts to do it. We can't do that if we really want to change things. Getting reelected does not matter as much as really changing things does. And so, you know, all of those things are so important to us, and it's important that we're proactive and we're building the organizing in our community to make sure that we don't have to have conversations about things going astray.
Beautiful. Well, that is the end of the panel of me and Leigh asking questions, but we wanted to open it up now for audience questions. So if you look in the chat right below the donate to Robin link, which everybody should also do, but Justin just put in the chat a Google form that if you want to submit a question, fill out the Google form. And it's real quick. It's just your name, your chapter, and one sentence of your question. Our hope is we're going to get a lot more questions that we have time for. So we're going to try and, you know, make sure there's some geographical spread, progressive stack, different questions to different panelists get asked. So Justin's going to curate that. Apologies in advance if your question doesn't get asked, but submit it there. and we'll line those up. We told the candidates who are all on a later time zone that we're going to try and keep it to 90 minutes, and we're 6 minutes from that. I'm going to appeal to all of you to stick around so we can hear from folks, but also 100% respect after months and months of exhausting work. If you need to check out, let me know and I'll make sure you have last word before we end it, but we'll try and keep it tight. Right before we submit questions though, Leigh is going to introduce a special guest here real quick. So get your questions in as Leigh introduces them.
Thanks, Ty. Okay, so a special guest here tonight. He is running for city council in Los Angeles's District 13 to take out a real estate funded establishment Democrat. Please welcome my longtime friend and comrade, Hugo Soto Martinez. Hey,
Thank
Hugo.
you, Leigh. Hey, what's up? Look at so many powerful people on the same screen. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, so Hugo has been an organizer at Unite Here Local 11 in LA for 15 years, y'all. That's how we know each other. We used to work there together for the whole time I was there, you were there, Hugo. So because of this shared experience at Unite Here, Hugo, I know you know a lot about building an organizing structure and having a plan to win. Unite Here is the kind of union that really focuses on organizing non-union workers into the union through militant worker-led campaigns. So now you are trying to apply that experience to electoral politics. You've got your chapter's endorsement and a working group to drive it, union and community endorsements, and I know small dollar donations rolling in. I think you're well positioned for a win, Hugo, but of course it won't be easy. You and your team, I know some of whom are here tonight, are already doing a lot of these things that our panelists recommended, but what are some of the things that you heard tonight that you hadn't thought of or that you want to incorporate into your plan to win?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And thanks to Eve, Richie, and Robin, y'all did an amazing job explaining your road to where you come to this point. And I think a few things that I had not been thought of is this issue of like leading with love. I think Eve talked a lot about that. And so I think that's a very powerful thing. And also the studying. I hadn't thought about, having, like study sessions among the team. I think that's really good. Of course, the coalition building that Richie talked about. I think those are all great things that I'm going to bring back to the team. We make decisions as a collective, right? And so I'm going to suggest that. And I think some folks are here that are on the team are listening. One thing about one thing about, one of the strategies we're using is, the labor movement in Los Angeles has been grown over the last 35 years. It really started, organizing undocumented workers in the 80s. And so I'm very lucky to come from that tradition. And, one of our goals here is marrying the movement that was started, it was fanned by Bernie Sanders, right? 2015 and 2016. And so our movement in Los Angeles is going to be the first time where we bring those two worlds together. I'm very excited about that. And for my folks in Florida, I did a lot of work with 737 and 362 out in Orlando. So I know the two presidents there. So Richie, hit me up if you need to talk to those folks. But yeah, we're going to be doing those two things here in Los Angeles.
That's great. A lot of fighting against Disney. That's what I remember from my time at Unite Here. Okay, so one more question for you, Hugo. And Unite Here is home of the 8 p.m. check-in, 6 a.m. picket line, right? Burnouts. I got burned out. Like that was real, You, however, I think you really know the importance of taking care of yourself for this long haul fight. Tell us, how do you practice self-care when the movement never sleeps?
Yeah, I agree. And, I learned it the hard way. Leigh, after you left, after 11 years of organizing, I started getting panic attacks and got a deep depression. And it was about a good year that I was not my full self. And so, but, in that sort of dark space, I'm going back to some of the stuff that Eve said. I started reading a lot of the teachings of the civil rights movement, and James Lawson is an amazing mentor, and I got into Buddhism, and just like love. And we think about when we fight with anger, if you think about that emotion of anger, it's very heavy. It's hard to remain angry for such a long time. But love is an emotion that's light, it's free flowing. You could use that emotion forever, right? And so I learned to see it in a loving way, the movement that we do. And just some best practices. I meditate every single day. I exercise 3 or 4 times a week. I sleep my 8 hours. My schedule is extremely regimented. And every year I go on a Buddhist retreat, plug away and just meditate and just be with my thoughts and self. So I would say that I asked this question to Reverend James Lawson, and I told him what I did. And I asked him the same question you're asking me. And he said to me, it sounds like you're already doing what you need to do. And so he validated a lot of the things that I brought. So that's what I would suggest for folks to do it. You can do it forever. And James Lawson just turned 93. And so I want to do this when I'm not in my 90s as well.
Right on. Thanks, Ugo, for coming. Okay, I hope everybody can get involved in your campaign. We can support you, just like folks from across the country supported these 3 candidates here today. So more on that to come. Ty,
Awesome.
You want to take it away?
Yeah. So we're gonna jump into a round of questions, and just to make sure we have people enough time to hear from a number of folks from the audience, the way we're going to do it is kind of take 3, 4, 5 questions first, and then kind of turn it over to the panel to answer. And if we have time, we'll do a second round like that. The bad part of that is not every question always gets answered adequately. Panelists will do their best, but we get to hear from more people, so bear with us. So we're going to start with Mary from Portland. Go ahead with your question. 1 minute, please. Keep it to 1 minute or less.
Oh, I was asking if any of you had campaigned on raising taxes in some particular way to fund something specific, if that was part of any of your campaigns.
I can quickly share. Taxing the rich was part of. Oh, sorry.
Is it? I left an awkward pause there, Robin. I'm going to do the thing I said I was going to do though, and keep people moving through. Can we then hear from? I'm going to ask Bruce from Pinellas, Florida, to go next, and then after that, Robert Shields from Los Angeles. And then we'll turn it over to y'all. But keep notes, and so you can come back to what you were going to say, Robin.
Okay, my question is, we all know that the National Democratic Party is controlled by big business and rich interests. On the other hand, at the local level, some Democratic parties are very much Bernie oriented, or very not under the control actually of big business and big donors and things of that sort. And so it's all sorts of differences in that so-called party, which is hardly a party at all. And I just wondered how that played out in terms of your attitude and how you relate to your local Democrats in your area, depending on what you've got. What kind of local party do you see where you are, and how do you deal with them?
And then Robert from Los Angeles.
Thanks, Ty. Yeah, my questions maybe for all 3. Didn't quite catch the beginning, but like, what do some of y'all see as your role as a Marxist in DSA and building an independent movement more broadly in the USA? Because we see so many. I'm from LA, and the Democrats control the city. How do we fight back against the Democrats and show people there are alternatives? And we trying to build? What are we trying to build out of this? Like, is it a new party, something explicitly socialist that can be a pole of attraction to people?
All right, why don't we just stop there and let each candidate maybe take 2 minutes to hop in and answer 1, 2, or all 3 if you can try and do it, and hopefully we'll get everything addressed. Anybody want to take a first crack?
I can go for the,
Go for
it. So quick thing, tax on the rich, we campaigned on that. And now I think for this year, what we're going to be focusing on is how to actually do taxation through fees because of state preemptions of us not being able to raise taxes, but we can apply fees on everyone. So what would it look like to explore putting fees on corporate polluters, corporate developers, so that we can actually create additional revenue streams to support the expansion and construction of public housing, to create, green energy hubs. So basically like being able to start actually creating or extracting wealth from big business to fund these public investment programs. Your question, Bruce, about the Democratic Party. I've lived in Chicago and now Minneapolis under Democratic oversight my entire life, and also in many points federally where we've had Democrats in all levels of governance. And I can't really positively speak to it. My loved ones were not sent away to prison because of marijuana distribution by Republicans. My family was not denied quality public housing by Republicans. My mom was not denied livable wages for 30 plus years by Republicans. All the instability that me and many Black folks that I know and love have experienced instability under Democratic oversight. And I think for 50 plus years, we've made an effort to try to take back this party, to reform it, and we've seen nothing. And I think this recent development around the Build Back Better plan, or the failure of that, is just a continued failure of the party to actually prioritize and fight for working class people interests. And I can't speak to anyone else, but in the time that we have left on this this world, I want to actually fight for building independent political power. And so yeah, I think there was a question about independent political power too. And I think it's through running campaigns like mine, embracing this platform and showing through wins like ours, Eve, that working class people have an option. Democratic Party do not have, dominion over working class people, and we can actually provide an opening. And working class people are looking for that right now, especially now. People are angry. They student loans are about to start back up. People are about to go in debt because of childcare issues. Working class people are tired, and we can actually fulfill that political vacuum and do it independently. So my thoughts.
Who wants to take the next shot at those?
I can take a quick shot at these. Yeah, we also talked a lot about, we also face a lot of these state preemptions on taxing, but there are a lot of options. So we have to be creative. Like a lot of times, like the local establishment folks will be like, there's nothing we can do unless they do something at the state house or whatever, but it's not true, right? You can, you can say, hey, if you pollute, you have to pay like a leakage fee. If you don't build your new fancy development building to the highest standards, you have to pay. There are like all these different things you can do. You can do stuff like we have an excise tax on cars, and it's like $200 for everyone who has a car every year. That's the rule. But we have total control over how we implement that. So we could make it progressive. So if you have like an $80,000 luxury car, you pay more, and we can decide how to allocate that money. There's just like all this stuff. Sometimes it gets into really like boring details. I didn't always lead with that, but I was like, we will tax the rich. Like, believe you me, we will tax the rich, and we will use it to build social housing and invest in infrastructure. I will pursue every legal means of doing it, and we have looked into it, and those means exist. And that's all you got to say. And if people want to wonk out with you about the minutia, like we got that to back it up too, right? Yeah, the local Democratic Party is interesting because for us, almost like the British Labour Party in Somerville, it's like two parties in one, because you've got these really nasty establishment figures who are like truly awful. I hope they're listening to this. And then you've got like a lot of the Our Revolution Somerville people like participate in these ward committees. Like they really see themselves as like Bernie Sanders Democrats. And I'm always like, man, like, don't spend your time on that. Like they're just sucking up, they're like bloodsuckers, they're sucking up all your time and organizing energy. And they're like, no, I really think we could make some gains here. Like progressives need to be there to stop the worst stuff. It's like, okay, I'm not going to spend my time doing that, but I understand why you're doing that. But I agree, like, you know, it is mixed in that sense, because there are like literally good human beings who are socialists or kind of Bernie-crats who are spending their time on it. But on the whole, I agree with Robin. I mean, I think if you zoom out, it hasn't been a force for good. And it also has this constant active attempt to co-opt and neutralize like radical working class energy. So I think that that's something we need to be cautious of too. And I'm always trying to get the good work on that. And actually to that point, and to Robert's question about being a Marxist, I mean, like, you can kind of pontificate about your various ideas, but that doesn't really convince anybody, right? You have to be fighting alongside of them, and your whatever kind of abstract Marxist ideas have to motivate actual decisions you make, like running as an independent, or like co-governing with social movements, or like building up DSA's power and structures and capabilities. Like, all these things come from a Marxist analysis, and you have to show that that approach gets the goods for working people, right? And then people come around. Like, so if you have, like, you know, DSA's a melting pot, we got anarchists, we got social democrats, we got everything, right? So if you've got your own point of view, don't just like do reading groups and yell at people, like, please, especially on Twitter. But, like, get out there and fight and be like, and test it and analyze and push through and win, and then people will come along with you. That's how it works.
Beautiful. Richie, take it away.
Yeah, I'll just say quickly, because my co-panelists here are really covering these issues thoroughly. I'll just say quickly that, yeah, okay, so for tax the rich, we didn't have anything specific. We have a myriad of legal issues here. We're in Florida, and it is incredibly Republican in the state house. It's interesting to hear from people who live in states that are governed by Democrats talk about talk about preemption issues in their local communities as well, because, you know, here it's like, oh, it's because we have Republicans in the state house, and it's like, well, it probably would still be this way even if we had Democrats in the state house as well. So that's interesting to hear from my perspective. But I'm very interested as y'all find out, like, okay, this fee's legal and we can do it in a progressive way. Send me an email about that. I'll appreciate that. Yeah, because there's, you know, we can't come up with everything on our own here. So that's tax the rich. The other two questions I think I can tackle at the same time. I think Bruce is the person who knocked the most doors on my campaign, so he knows exactly what I'm about to say about this. So our local Democratic Party here, you know, it's county based, and then that's under the state, and then, you know, national. Our local county Democratic Party had like a takeover by like Bernie Sanders people last year, and you know, that's not to say that like they don't still beef with some of the more centrist leaning people in the party, but I can tell you, like, you know, some of the people who do a lot of the field work for the party had been some of the most centrist and of our campaign. And so,
Richie, you're cutting in and out a little bit.
Computer.
Okay.
Am I here?
You're
okay.
Good now. You're good. Keep going.
Yeah, something, my computer just went. Okay. Anyway, so yeah, we had an interesting relationship where our local Democratic Party actually like enthusiastically backed me against a moderate, and so it was really interesting. And yeah, there was a couple of people here and there that were like, meh, begrudgingly came along, but it was a nonpartisan race, so it didn't get complicated. That's what our relationship is like. Now, if we had run this race 3 years ago in this county, it would not have been like that at all. It's changed drastically in the last 3 years. 3 years ago, you know, the people in charge were threatening progressives, doing everything they could to try to get people. I'm saying progressives, not just socialists, progressives, like people to my right, threatening them. And so it's changed a lot lately. And you know, it's an interesting thing to deal with. Again, like you've said, it's not like what I want to spend my time doing, or what I encourage. I encourage people not to spend their time doing that, especially once you get to a point where they're not hostile to the left. There's really nothing. There's really no power there. It's not a real party. There's no operation. So once they're at that point to where they're not hostile to the left, it's fine. But I think that flows into the next question, which is, what are we doing to build independent power? And that's why it's so important that we ran this campaign through our DSA chapter, and all the knowledge we gained, all the skills we gained, every tool we used is housed within our movement. All the vendors we used, the prices that we got for things, like we kept track of them ourselves, and we're able to use that for the next campaign that we run, or the next candidate we support, or the next issue that we're trying to focus on. And we start to really build, I think really our chapter is focused a lot on like party surrogacy right now, and making sure that like our movement is actually functioning like a real political party when it comes to electoral issues. And so in a way that the Democratic Party literally can't because of legal barriers. And the last thing I'll say is that we are a Democratic run town as well. But this is new actually in the last I don't know, decade or so. And Republicans are still getting elected citywide. Just as recently as 2 years ago, 2 Republicans were elected citywide. And so it's just a different situation here. Florida, like a blue city, but can swing sometimes. It's getting more Democratic. But I say this to say that it's interesting when, the party actually, here's the point I'm trying to make, is that yes, there's a majority of Democrats on the city council, and this is a new thing. But what's interesting is that it seems like the activist base of the party is not happy with a lot of the members on city council because of the things that they've been doing and the deals that they've been making with Republicans. And so that actually makes the relationship with me a little bit less complicated because, and this is what I'm talking about with the legal barriers to accountability with the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party has no means by which to control the people who are elected right now and are doing things that they don't like, because those campaigns were run by consultants, and yeah, those volunteers just keep getting used by them. And so when we're building our own party surrogate, we're bypassing all of that, and it's a different story then.
Thank you all. I know we're losing a couple people, but I want to get to just a couple more questions. We're not going to get to all of them, and then give all of you a chance for some closing remarks. I think there's been incredible discussion so far, and we'll close it out with this. So I'm going to just read the names so people can be queued up and try and keep them brief. We have Laura Wadland from Portland, Justin from Seattle, Mandy from Phoenix, and Brandon from Portland. And if you could each try and keep it under a minute, that would be excellent. And we'll close it out after that. Stick around. Go ahead, Laura.
Hey, thank you all so much for being here. I'm taking a labor candidate school right now, and they're really drilling into us that if you run for office, you have to spend a lot of time on the phone calling people, asking for money. And I'm just wondering how much time you all spent in your campaigns doing phone time.
Okay, then Justin.
Hey, yeah, I'm Justin from Seattle, dual member of Social Alternative and DSA. I was a part of the Shama Solidarity campaign. Yeah, so India Walton's mayoral campaign in Buffalo was totally undermined by the union leadership there, who overwhelmingly supported incumbent opponent. And instead of aggressively building like rank and file support to oppose those conservative union leaders, her campaign backed down from that fight and failed to polarize against the Democratic establishment. And I think, we had a strong contrast here in Seattle with the Shama Solidarity campaign, which won support from many unions over the objections of the leaders through rank and file action. And also during the recall fight here in Seattle, we had the carpenter strike that Shama, openly called out the carpenter leadership and supported rank and file carpenters who rejected for contracts and were trying to build a fighting strike. So my question here, I'm just, wondering, we need to be oriented to the rank and file and supporting their needs and demands, even when their union leadership refuses to. So how do you all see your role in furthering this goal? Thanks.
Awesome. And then Mandy. Mandy, you with us? We'll go to Brandon, and Mandy, you'll have a chance if you can come in after Brandon.
Hi, yeah, thanks everyone. This has been great. My question is basically just wanting to dive more into the question of social movements and sort of what is the relationship between the elected official and the building of social movements, building of DSA. I'm curious how you guys see the role of a candidate in and an official once in office in terms of building wider movements, building, you know, protests, unions, et cetera, building DSA, helping to grow DSA, having that as part of your profile. Curious if you've thought about that, how to integrate that into actually being in office so that there's a lasting organizational reflection of that on the ground.
And I'm going to give Mandy one last chance if you're with us. So no worries. Who wants to, so this is sort of for the candidates, answer the questions, but also if you have any last words, you know, parting thoughts, leave us with them. Try and keep it to 3 minutes if you can.
Can I if you could like summarize the first question again? It's like, it's late here.
I hear you.
I'm spacing out. I'm sorry.
I think the first question was just how much phone time did you spend on your campaign? Meaning asking for money. How much were you spending doing phone time on raising money versus out in the community campaigning?
Yeah. Okay, I do remember now. And I'm gonna just jump in and do this. Yeah, it's almost 11 p.m. here on the East Coast, and so
thank you for staying with us.
Yeah. I'm losing it. Okay, so I'll get to I'll just do these quickly. Phone time. I will tell you an interesting story about our campaign. Is we started out at one point working with a finance consultant that came recommended by a progressive organization, and we quickly realized it was a waste of our time. Like, what am I doing on the phone? Like, I would call in a rich person and be like, give me your money so I can raise your taxes. Like, what about it doesn't make any sense. Like, our money comes from working class people who can only give $20 at a time. And when you can only give $20 at a time, you know, if I spent all day, every day on the phone, I'm never going to raise the money I need like that. I have to figure out a bigger way to connect with people. It's not to say I didn't spend some time on the phone talking to some people for, you know, with fundraising as part of the purpose, but really is just like gaining support in general. I spent a long time calling everybody in our DSA chapter and telling them, you know, we're doing this campaign. Some of them were able to give some money. Most of the people on our DSA chapter are poor. So that's how it ended up working out. I had, you know, lists of people who were really big Bernie backers that I had gotten from Bernie Sanders campaign people. And I called them and talked to them about the campaign. It went about the same way. You know, it was during the pandemic too. So like a lot of people that had been in a good position to donate previously were not this time. So anyway, that's all to be said. I didn't spend much time, like maybe during the first couple of months, I spent a total of 5 hours doing that. And then we raised maybe like 2% of our money like that. And then the other 98% were raised from, you know, labor organizations were a chunk, but really it was mostly small dollar donations from people. And we had creative ways to do this. Like we held fundraisers with DSA chapters across the state. Where we had Zoom calls where we had live music come. It was an amazing experience. We did like a one thing where we like signed, we sent out Mother's Day cards, like for people who donated like $5 or something. That raised a little chunk of money, selling swag, like, and just really amplifying our message with our partners that we worked with in other organizations, but really mostly in DSA across the country. And so that made a big difference. So I spent a lot of time on that. And I'll just say to the other questions, which I did write down, I think there were labor and social movement orientations. for the rank and file question, like I'm a strong believer in amplifying the rank and file. I left my job. I was an engineer and I left and became a teacher. So part of the reason is because I was industrializing and becoming a rank and file worker. And so and we started a rank and file caucus in our union, and we won some executive board seats. And I think it's something I'm trying to figure out right now, especially being in a place where union density is at like 3 or 4%. It's kind of tricky. And so, I'm still connected to the people that I organized with in my union. And I'm connected with people in other unions. And we're really trying to work out what that looks like right now. And I'd love to get some lessons from Seattle and the recall campaign. And then as far as social movements are concerned, I think it kind of goes back to the same thing that we talked about when it comes to accountability. It's just really trying to root ourselves in them, making sure that that's what got us here, and that's what's going to keep us here as well. And yeah, I think I'm gonna leave it there because
Awesome.
it is late, and I'm really grateful to have been able to participate in this call. I'm really grateful for people to just be interested in what we have going on, like in our chapter's called Pinellas County. Like, who's ever heard of Pinellas County, Florida? Like, if you're not from basically central Florida, you don't know. Yeah. And so I'm really grateful for people to be interested in what we've got going on here. And I'm really glad to be able to come share that. And I look forward to continuing to build these connections, because things like this are what's so powerful. Is that I'd say I've been relating a little bit to something that Bernie said recently, that Bernie said in his his speech. I don't remember what park it was, but it was in New York. And it's the fight for someone you don't know speech. And he talked about how I'm pretty sure this is where it's from, I could be wrong. He talked about how he fought a lot of battles and felt lonely a lot, but he doesn't feel lonely now. And it's so important for me personally, and I think all of us, to stay connected to the movement, because I was at a committee meeting today, like the only socialist in the room, the only socialist to ever even get close to the room, like, and I felt quite lonely while I was there, really, like thinking, like, what am I supposed to do in this situation? But then I come home and I get on a call like this, and I know that there's a lot of other people dealing with similar issues across the country. And it's very important that we stay connected and we talk about the things that we're going through. And so I'm really grateful to have been able to participate in this. And I look forward to, continuing to do things like this as time goes on, and continuing to connect with all the amazing people doing this work across the country.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Richie. Robin or Eve, one of you guys want to take it next?
I can give Robin the last word. I can go down. I don't want to follow that though. That was really good. Yeah. I'm glad you don't feel lonely anymore. That's it really can be an isolating experience to do this. And honestly, I don't know how all these liberals who are just in it for the career or whatever, it must be an isolating, weird, bleak experience, because I absolutely could not have gotten through this without the deep connection with the comrades that I did this with. And also to national movements like this, right? I want to talk about the phone thing. By the way, if you can find yourself, if your DSA chapter can find yourself a candidate who in like a self-directed way can like sit down and make hours of fundraising calls, like that's great for you. Like it's a totally brutal thing. And that is like actually really difficult. And it takes a lot of discipline and frankly shamelessness to do, and it's and just kind of not giving a fuck, and that's awesome. I think I did it a little bit, like there are people in DSA who have like software jobs, or who I know through activism, who like will give a couple $100 to like a socialist campaign. So like I called them. I called folks like that. I called some of my family members and made them feel bad. The community and like stuff like that. I totally did that. I did it in the face of the campaign before we started the field campaign. So like on May 1st for our November 2nd election, we were going to like start the field campaign, and I had illusions I was going to continue to make fundraising calls, and there just wasn't time. I was out on the doors. The pace was totally different. But I did make some calls in that initial period while we were still hiring a field director and planning the campaigns. Like, what else was I going to do besides, I guess, my day job 40 hours a week. But some of that DSA time that I was like spending being co-chair or whatever, I would instead our bylaws meant I couldn't be co-chair anymore because I was running for office. So I would make some fundraising calls. But like AOC is always saying, if you can get small dollar fundraising, like, the Boston DSA at the chapter level sent out fundraising emails to the members and called members and asked them for money. We got like National DSA had this tandem form for all nationally endorsed candidates. We got money that way. The more of that happens, the less the candidates have to spend time on this. Because the thing is, your candidate's always going to be your best canvasser, right? Like your persuasion rate on the doors for for the candidate themselves, just for like kind of idiotic reasons to do with the individualistic culture of our society. People think it's nice and they feel special when the candidate knocks on their door, right? And probably in part because like the liberals or whatever, or even conservatives in the case of somewhere like over Richie's running, who have run before, are totally out of touch with them. So it is cool to like meet the person and make a personal connection with them. Like that is good. And you find just quantitatively, like your persuasion rate into a committed support is like 75%. Maybe for a volunteer, it's like 50%, right? So the more time you can not be making calls and can be out doing organizing, building coalition relationships, doing events and knocking doors, the better. So, but definitely the phone calling for money was a component of it. So yeah, definitely. But we also did like a barbecue for DSA members, so we raised like over $1,000 that way. There are like other more community building, cooler ways of making money, which I think play a bigger role on campaigns that are funded by small dollar donations, right? It's funny. We have a president of a labor union in Somerville who like hated me. He was like all in on the bad Teamsters slate. He's like really conservative, and he made a transphobic meme about me. It was like bad news, right? It was like not good. So like definitely sometimes you do see, but there are many people in his union who are also, I guess this isn't his local, but like the UPS guy who delivers things, like we're friends. We talked about you. He's like an anti-Hoffa guy. Like we talk about all the, so it was great. So I do think we need to have this rank and file orientation. I got the Greater Boston Labor Council endorsement. I was on, and our local teachers union actually there's a rank and file caucus in power right now, the Somerville Caucus of Rank and File Educators, and their like star rank and file organizer on their contract action team is a socialist alternative member, right? So they're like, and we were like shutting down school committee meetings. We're like chanting. They're like 100 teachers and community members in there in our like little city. So it's like the situation for me isn't like it was for India Walton, and it takes. Having this rank and file orientation is so politically important, but it's a tough line for socialists to walk to like critique like union leaders who are doing bad stuff like they did in Buffalo in a way that like is genuinely building rank and file power and not just sort of like abstractly heckling people, right? So you have to be in the unions, like your organizers have to like be there. You have to like, it's not just a matter of like saying the right thing. Right. So I think it's important to have that orientation. And I just think you got to do it in a principled and effective way. Thankfully, I didn't have to negotiate some of that trickier campaign in my own campaign, which was good. And yeah, I'm looking forward to building. I mean, I'm not going to be in office, but I hope we can use our seats. And it was an explicit plan to do things like save. There are like 200 union jobs that are mostly immigrants at this laundry that's being replaced by like some big luxury building. And we have to fight to save those jobs along with UFCW, right? So like we're going to use those seats to participate in that fight. We're going to build DSA out of this. Somerville DSA has never been stronger. So many people came into their own through this fight. So, we've talked about this a lot. I won't rehash it, but we're going to keep it rolling.
Awesome, Eve. Thank you so much. And Robin, take it away with the last word.
Ooh, the pressure. So yes, quick thing. We knew for my team fundraising was going to be a crucial piece. I mean, especially since we were running independent, but also we knew that our victory hinged on a strong ground game. We had to, outdoor knock, out canvas, out lid drop everybody in our race. So that meant, yeah, we had to do the uncomfortable work. And at least what I found for my campaign after the launch phase where we raised $10,000, and that was largely through my own internal network. But what we found to be successful was not actually calling people. We didn't get a lot of receptivity on that. It could be that we also had other elections to compete with. Folks were just drained after the presidential elections, and the DNC hitting them up every other day being like, hey, you give us money. So we had to be creative and do a lot of events, which were very labor intensive. So we did fun events like trivia night. We did karaoke. We actually, like, our parties was lit. Like, we had lots of fun throughout the campaign trail. Towards the end of the quarter, we actually held a concert. One of our phenomenal volunteers who hosted the concert and ended up being one of our field leaders, again, like leadership development of this. Like, she pulled together a concert where we raised $6,000. So, I mean, we had to get very creative of hosting a lot of events throughout the year to maximize donation to reach that $95,000 figure. And then kind of the question around labor and social movement, I think really goes hand in hand, especially as a transitioning labor organizer. I work for our statewide teachers union. I think another dynamic to highlight, especially as elected officials that's working to build, social movements or amplify the demands of social movements. We're here to be a megaphone for them, and to also lead political fights and actually fragment, the ranks of working class people with, not the ranks, but this attachment to big business, because they lied to us and manipulate us. I mean, because they force us to work with them. And I think part of that is definitely calling out labor leadership, but more specifically, what I've learned is also labor staffers. They play a major role in the management of working class people under these unions as a staffer. So I think it's also going to be very crucial for any social movements that we're building. It has to be with rank and file. And I'm really grateful that our campaign led with that. The reason why we got the teachers endorsement, granted, I work for the statewide teachers union, it wasn't a given. We had rank and file educators who were a part of our campaign who took the charge upon themselves to go into, their leadership meetings and say, you need to hurry up and endorse this candidate. This is a time in which we can actually support independent political elected official, because we ain't got nothing with these Democrats, and they're amongst our own ranks. And now, did all the labor support us? No. But the fact that we built relationships with rank and file union members, like, those are the ones through our campaigns we should be helping train up to also call out and push out their own labor leadership to really push or reverse this dynamic of staffers driving the unions as opposed to working class people. But I think that all goes with, again, like, our roles as elected officials is, one, to amplify the demands of working class people, to also use it as a seat to unleash the potential of working class people too. Like, we have the ability to create transitional demands and free up people's mental capacities, their time to actually devote to showing up on the picket lines, to calling out their bosses. Like, that is what we have the ability to do. One of the things in my own office that we're excited about is bringing in delegations, either virtually or in person, from New Zealand to talk about the ways in which they've expanded their unarmed workforce within their public safety system, and basically have removed guns from their public safety workers. We want to bring in folks from New York who just made it legal for immigrants to vote. We want to bring them in. So you have the platform to do that as an elected official. As Eve mentioned, the establishment is going to constantly tell us we can't do these things. They told us that with the 15 minimum wage, that it wasn't legal. We can't do this. They told us the same thing around rent control. And the role that we have as elected officials and as organizers is to actually build the movements, the coalitions, through canvassing, all the things that we did through on the campaign trail to build a militant working class a force to actually push back on that, to say, like, no, those limitations are not real. And if you don't deliver this, then you're going to fuck around and find out, like, in a different way. Either you're going to give me these concessions the civil way, or, I mean, we could go a different direction, like putting it in the hands of the ruling class to decide, how do you want to go about this in making working class concessions? So I think, We are here. It is an antagonistic role. It is hard as fuck. We are going to have to call out what is supposed to be our allies at times. We're going to have to constantly call out the political establishment. And that's exactly what we're here to do. And I'm fully, if I don't, we're in 2-year terms. If all I accomplish is basically making it clear that the downtown council and big business is public enemy number one and get rent control passed, I would be happy with that, as opposed to having to feel like I have to capitulate to my liberal council members, to the political establishment, to big business in order to make these mediocre concessions that we know do not transform material conditions nor build power for working class people. We are here to build that power. We are here to unleash that potential so that working class people know that they can take over society. They have everything that they need to govern society. We don't need Jeff Bezos anymore. We can take over Amazon and run it better than anyone, any of these CEOs or shareholders could. And let's do this. And we got folks like you all, like 90 socialists all across the country who's ready to make that happen. So I'm looking forward to building that in every single city, because this has to be a national movement, a local movement, and international movement. So let's get to work, y'all.
Well, man, a huge round of applause, virtual applause for all of you. Thank you so much. I know it's late on the East Coast, late in the Midwest. Thank you for sticking around with us, and for all the wisdom, enthusiasm, and inspiration that each of you offered. I definitely want to thank Leigh and all the crew in Portland DSA who played a central role in bringing this together, along with Tacoma DSA, Los Angeles DSA. Thank you so much, Hugo, for joining us and telling us about your exciting campaign. Thank you to Seattle DSA, who I know was extremely busy up to just this last week, making sure Shama's recall was defeated. And still a lot of y'all showed up and came here to join this discussion. So thanks everybody who made this event happen. And, I don't think I have a lot of extra words to close it out, but the point of this whole exercise and I think Robin, summed it up, is to say, hey, working class people can take political power in this country and in this world, and we need to. We can't let Jeff Bezos continue running Amazon. Working class people need democratic public control of these massive corporations, of the fossil fuel industry, of everything else. It's only through mass movements, and electoral politics is a cutting edge of that we're going to win. And I think that was a message that came through loud and clear, and that it's possible, whether you're in a first-time candidate in the South. I was so inspired, Richie, when you said, like, none of us had done this before. I was like, damn, that's impressive, because I know in Minneapolis, we tried lots of times and had a lot of experience, and there was a different dynamic there that made it hard. And Robin, found the key to the puzzle that several of us attempted to find and failed in the past. And Eve, the advanced development of a slate to try and, not just win a few seats, but you were aiming, you didn't quite make it, but you were aiming to build a socialist majority on the city council. That's inspiring stuff. So I think these and so many more stories across the country, we have to share with each other. We have to keep talking to each other, learning best practices, best methods, best politics, to be able to build DSA into a force that can help lead the working class in this country to power. So thank you all so much for participating. Thanks to the audience, and good night.